Well, we have something special planned today. Really nice. I love A Course in Miracles. I studied it for a number of years, and I refer to it a lot. And I take some of the lessons of A Course in Miracles and use them in my own life, some more than others, with some success and sometimes not so much success. But I do. There's some great stuff in A Course in Miracles. And I've known a few people who really get the Course in Miracles and really understand it. I found it very challenging intellectually at times to grasp it, and it's like set up that way. There was one, Hal Rosencrantz back at Unity of the Palm Beaches used to say that he knew a nuclear physicist, quantum physicist, quite well, who said that he was reading A Course in Miracles every day for 6 months before it occurred to him one day that he'd never read an entire page of A Course in Miracles without stopping and going back and starting over again. He'd never just read it through like you would read a book. And this is a quantum physicist struggling with it. And it's kind of that way. It's very intricate. And I've only known a few people who really, are who I consider very, very good at it. I'm going to use the word whiz at it, but who really have an intellectual grasp of it and a practical grasp. One of those is Marianne Williamson, who I used to work for. Definitely Marianne Williamson, certainly. And astronaut Edgar Mitchell was another one. He taught A Course in Miracles down in West Palm Beach for years. And the other one is the woman who's going to be speaking with us today. She's not a public speaker. She's not a lecturer. That's not what she does. But she has blessed us by being willing to just come up and sit down and talk with us a little bit about some of the things that she understands from A Course in Miracles. And she's very, very excellent, hot on it. So, Susan, come on up, would you? You get to sit in that's the Queen's chair. If I can get everything out of the way here. I want this to be able to support you however you want it to be done. Sure, I will. I'll be the hander outer.
Good morning. So, how many of you think your life might go a little better, you might have a little more peace of mind if you had some people who would just act a little differently? Maybe even go away. Well, I used to think that way a lot in the past, and I still do, and I have to apply spiritual principles now for that. I know that John's been talking to you a lot about 12-step programs in the last couple of weeks, and I've had the great privilege of attending Al-Anon. Al-Anon is known as a program for family and friends of alcoholics and people who have other types of addictions. And thank goodness that program is there for people. It's also just an amazing program for anyone. For me, it's really a program of humility. It's a program for peace of mind, no matter what you have going on in your life. But anyway, when I first arrived at Al-Anon, probably about 12 years ago, I arrived with a lot of resistance. I came there with the illusion that my life would be better if this other person, these other people, would just act differently, right? I had it all figured out. I knew what they weren't doing right and what they could be doing right, and they were squandering all my good wisdom and advice, right? I was God's assistant little deputy because God had to keep his eyes on all the little sparrows too, so I thought I would help out and keep my eye focused on these other people because I clearly was seeing what they needed to do. That doesn't make for a lot of personal happiness. So I was under this illusion that this person with changed behavior would be happy. And I was under the illusion that with this person changing their behavior, and my life would be great. I would have this peace of mind. And then I came to Al-Anon, and they said, yeah, that person has their issues, but now you need to look at yourself. Me? And the first step, which he's probably gone over, is I'm powerless. I really resisted that step. looking at that. What do you mean I'm powerless? I'm a powerful person. Who wouldn't feel powerless in this situation? This is craziness, right? In every other area of my life, I'm powerful. But in this situation, who wouldn't be crazy, right? So I looked up at that step and I resisted it. It felt like a concession. Like, who wants to be powerless now? I came here to get answers. And then they're telling me I've got to look at me? So one of the other steps, fourth step, is that we start looking at taking a fearless moral inventory, a searching and fearless moral inventory. That's of ourselves. I've been so practiced taking everybody else's inventory, right? You'll hear that word come up if you enter any 12-step programs, is taking an inventory. And when we first arrive, we've often been such experts at taking other people's. We don't even have a sense of ourselves sometimes. We've really lost sense. So that initial phase is really getting us to turn our attention back to ourselves, right? Instead of identifying other people as selfish, narcissistic, irresponsible, arrogant, mean. Have you heard yourself referring to anybody this way in the last week, the last month, last 2 decades? Okay. So when we get there, again, we're looking for answers, and then they tell us we have to look at ourselves. I remember in one of my first couple meetings, a woman shared that she was so grateful that her husband was an alcoholic, because otherwise she would not have discovered that program. And again, I was sitting in my resistance, and I remember thinking, how effing crazy is that? This lady is happy she's here. I didn't want to be there. And after a while, I got to see what she meant. You know, we talk about in the 12-step programs that resentments are the great number one offender, right? They kill our peace of mind. They kill the harmony in our relationships. And so, again, Al-Anon says, take it back to us. Let it begin with me is one of the slogans. If any of you used to watch Saturday Night Live years ago, Al Franken had that character, Stuart Smalley. He used to look in the mirror, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. Well, one of his, my favorite lines that he had is, it's much easier to put on slippers than to carpet the world. And so I always look at these programs as putting on slippers rather than carpeting the world, right? How can you get the whole world carpeted? Not to mention getting all the vacuum cleaners, and you know somebody's going to come along and leave a big mess on your carpet anyway. So that's what I'm always looking for now in these programs. It was always a losing battle trying to focus on other people. Another point I want to tell you early on, when I went to one of these meetings, a woman shared that she was talking with her sponsor, and if any of you are familiar in these programs, you get somebody else who maintains the space of the wisdom for you when we're caught up in our troubles. And she said, oh, this person just triggers all my buttons. And the sponsor said, well, what are you doing with all those buttons? And I like that question because there's 2 points to it. One, how'd you get all those buttons in the first place? How'd they develop? That's part of that inventory that we start taking in the 4th step. And now that you know you have them, are you just going to walk around and let people detonate you right and left? Or are we going to start dismantling the buttons? And so that's another part of the program, is to start dismantling those, right? I can't walk around and be at the mercy of everybody else who's going to trigger my buttons. The 11th step of the program is to improve our conscious contact with God through prayer and meditation. One of the key words for me in that is conscious, right? There's so many times where I've left a situation that didn't turn out the way I might have hoped. And then I was like, oh, I could have had a V8. I could have brought God into that situation, and I didn't do that. So prayer, I like to look at things as practically as I can. And some people are afraid of all the woo-woo of spirituality. I always try and bring it back to the practical. So when I look at what is the function of prayer, so for me, prayer is setting an intentional frame for my perception and my experience. Hopefully beforehand. Sometimes I have to do it retroactively. You know, just like our physical body needs exercise, our spiritual body needs exercise. So by setting up prayer, we're exercising that muscle so it's less likely to atrophy. It's less likely to get weakened when we're in a more challenging situation. So that, for me, is the function of prayer. I don't want to leave it to chance. I don't want to leave it to this human mind that has grown up through many decades and developed its own buttons, right? My personalized context, left to my own devices, I can get whiny, I can get resentful, I can get bitter, I can get a sense of lack. When I live through these spiritual principles, it gives me a buoyancy that I might not have on my own. Another point I want to make about 12-step programs, we always talk about anonymity. And most people think of that as when I go there, nobody's going to talk about me afterward. I can safely share and nobody's going to spill the beans about me later. And yes, that's a very important principle, that we always have to maintain that confidentiality aspect. There's another aspect to anonymity, which is starting to gain some separation between ourselves and our story, to become anonymous from our story. Sometimes we're so entrenched in our story, we can't see the difference between what happened and our spiritual self that can rise above it. So that's another aspect that I always look at with anonymity, is getting that space in between our story and ourselves. That's the only leverage we have. That's the only leverage we have. We talk about how we're not responsible for our first thought, but we are responsible for our second thought. Our first thought might be a trigger, right? But our second thought is where we have some space to get our spiritual principles in there and get us and hopefully our relationships to a higher level. If any of you are artists, you know that you can take two different colored backgrounds and put the same color on top of it. You can take a brown and put it on green and put it on red, and it looks like a totally different shade of brown. So for me, I always think of that metaphor too, that prayer gives me a different context to hopefully get a different experience out of it. So, are you able to pass that out? As John mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about A Course in Miracles. To me, it's one of the simplest spiritual programs I've ever worked with. When I have trouble dealing with a particular situation, I have lots of Al-Anon has lots of readers, and I brought some of those today if anybody would like to peek at them. They're applicable to any situation you're dealing with, whether it's someone who has a problem of addiction or not. But for me, when I struggle, I always go back to Course in Miracles because it's so simple. It's black and white. Are we coming from fear or love? Are we seeking at-one-ment? We use the word atonement as at-one-ment. Or are we seeing separation? It's as simple as a program as I can get. So I often come back to it. So what I want to do is just go through this reading quickly, because to me, this is a practical, on-the-court spiritual exercise that I can use. It's not woo-woo. It actually has worked for me. So I'm going to read through it. Before I do, I want to just alert you to a couple words if you're not familiar with A Course in Miracles. You've got 2 pages here. On the second page, on the right side at the top, you'll see in the second line it's referring to dreams and later to illusions. Just to clarify what that means in terms of Course in Miracles. A dream or an illusion is the belief that we are separate from each other. That I am this mortal, vulnerable body that can be hurt, where we're jockeying for resources. We think it's a zero-sum game. If I win, you lose. If you win, I lose. So I just want to clarify that's what it refers to. The other point I want to clarify, at the bottom of the first page, there's a reference pardon me, to Christ. Now, for some people, Christ is loaded. For some people, Christ is meaningful. For some people, Christ has a neutral aspect. I always tell people when they read this, if Christ works for you, keep it. If it doesn't, substitute divine intelligence. Substitute love. But don't let that one throw you for a loop if you're not keen on Christ. Thank you. All right. I'm going to read through this once. We'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll share a few insights with you on how I've used it. Recognizing your brother. When you meet anyone, remember it is a holy encounter. As you see him, you will see yourself. As you treat him, you will treat yourself. As you think of him, you will think of yourself. Never forget this, for in him you will find yourself or lose yourself. Everyone lives in you as you live in everyone. Only appreciation is an appropriate response to your brother. Gratitude is due him for both his loving thoughts and his appeals for help, for both are capable of bringing love into your awareness if you perceive them truly. Recognize all whom you see as brothers, because only equals are at peace. When you have seen your brothers as yourself, you will be released. It will be given you to see your brother's worth when all you want for him is peace, and what you want for him you will receive. In truth, you and your brother stand together with nothing in between. Christ stands before you both each time you look upon your brother. Dream of your brother's kindnesses instead of dwelling in your dreams on his mistakes. Select his thoughtfulness to dream about instead of counting up the hurts he gave. Forgive him his illusions and give thanks to him for all the helpfulness he gave. And do not brush aside his many gifts because he is not perfect in your dreams. You can overlook your brother's dreams, so perfectly can you forgive him his illusions, he becomes your savior from your dreams. This is the tough line. It's not up to you to change your brother, but merely to accept him as he is. You will never know that you are co-creator with God until you learn that your brother is co-creator with you. Peace to my brother who is one with me. Let all the world be blessed with peace through us. So, I'll tell you how I use this prayer. Remember we talked about, we use prayer and meditation to have our conscious contact with God. Well, how about when we're consciously aware that we're off-center? What does that feel like? You know, when steam's coming out of our ears or nose, when our heart's racing, when our jaw's clenching. Okay, when we get conscious of that, and that's happening in relation to another person, that's when I pull this out and I read it. And I read it again and again and again until I've changed my state of being. I've had some people where I've had to read this for a half an hour, 45 minutes, take a break, come back and read it again. And, but it works. And again, I'm setting the context for my perception and my experience. We talk about, there's another section, I won't read the whole thing, from A Course in Miracles that says, you respond to what you perceive, and as you perceive, so shall you behave. Everything you perceive is a witness to the thought system you want to be true. What you perceive in others, you are strengthening in yourself. So again, if I'm present to somebody's mean, selfish, self-centered, well, guess what? They talk about also, I'm told in AA, if you spot it, you got it, right? So as long as I'm focused on those characteristics in that person, I'm strengthening those in myself. The Course in Miracles was saying, we'll say an illusion battles an illusion. We get locked in that illusion. So I'm using this prayer to get myself to back to a space of at-one-ment. So when we read through this, the goal is there can be many effects from it, and sometimes we think it doesn't work because we don't immediately get to a peace of mind space. And I know John talks a lot about Abraham Hicks here. Abraham talks about they're not big fans of quantum leaps. You can't get from angerness to happiness right away. So just try and get a little release. So ideally, once you read through this, we'd like to get to an actual space of gratitude toward this person for what they can teach us about ourselves, right? Sometimes that takes me days to get there. Maybe another place we could get to is just a willingness to forgive. We don't feel gratitude toward them yet, but maybe we're willing to forgive them. Another place that we might get to, like the Buddhists say, is the I don't know mind. Okay? I don't feel gratitude. I don't really want to forgive him. But maybe I can admit, I don't know. I don't know what to do in this situation. I'm powerless, and I don't know what to do. And I'll at least create a space and maybe go do the dishes or do something else I need to do for myself, right? Maybe it's just a surrender to powerlessness. And then maybe the smallest gift that I'll get from it in that moment is just a shift on the emotional scale. From, like I said, steam coming out of my ears to just a little bit of relaxation. So, how much time do we have? Not as much time. Okay. I want to share one last thing, how I use this prayer. This is written in the second person. It's speaking to you. When I need to really get present to this spiritual lesson for a specific person, I will reread it out loud in the first person and substitute that person's name. So for instance, I just want to make sure you're clear on how to do this. So when I need my glasses again. I'll take my friend Michael, who irritated me this week. Okay. I hope he's not watching on YouTube. Okay, John. Let's use John. Okay. So, here's how I would read it. When I meet John, let me remember it is a holy encounter. As I see him, I will see myself. As I treat him, I will treat myself. As I think of John, I will think of myself. Let me not forget this, for in him I will find myself or lose myself. Everyone lives in me as I live in everyone. Only appreciation is an appropriate response to John. Gratitude is due him for both his loving thoughts and his appeals for help, for both are capable of bringing love into my awareness if I perceive them truly. Let me recognize all whom I see as brothers, because only equals are at peace. When I see John as myself, I will be released. It will be given me to see John's worth when all I want for him is peace, and what I want for him I will receive. In truth, John and I stand together with nothing in between. Christ stands before us both each time I look upon John. Let me dream of John's kindnesses instead of dwelling in my dreams on his mistakes. Let me select his thoughtfulness to dream about instead of counting up the hurts he gave. Let me forgive his illusions and give thanks to him for all the helpfulness he gave. And let me not brush aside his many gifts because he is not perfect in my dreams. I can overlook John's dreams, so perfectly can I forgive him his illusions. He becomes my savior from my dreams. It is not up to me to change John, but merely to accept him as he is. I will never know that I am co-creator with God until I learn that John is co-creator with me. Peace to John, who is one with me. Let all the world be blessed with peace through us. It works. Read it. Okay. Just a few last points about this. I have used this prayer when people are not present with me. I had a coworker that I really struggled with. He and I really butted heads. And it was later on in life that I, maybe at least 5 to 10 years after I'd worked with him, I was thinking of this prayer and trying to find a place of gratitude for him. I was feeling some discord about it even 10 years later. I focused on this. And then it was within a course of a week, I was speaking with a former employee manager at this company where I'd worked. And she said, do you know, so-and-so just called me this week. And he told me that he was very hard on you and misunderstood you. And he realized now the gift that relationship was to him. Now that worked over time and place. Isn't that interesting? This also works with people who have died. If you have people that you're holding resentments with, certainly people in the present, as we've talked about, and people in the future. If you're looking toward a new job, a new relationship, if you get in this mind space about how that person can relate to you and you can relate to them, the gifts will unfold faster. I'm sure of it. So one last thing. We talk about the 12th step. Can you recite it? John? I'll read it. Yes. This is important.
Having had a spiritual awakening. Steps to carry these messages to other
Okay. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. I just want to make one last comment about this. This step could be a dangerous call to arms for me, especially if I'm a person who thinks I can see what's best for everybody else. And you know, when we get excited about a new spiritual idea, we want to share it with everyone. We want to tell them how they can apply it in their lives. You probably know from listening to Abraham, she says, we teach best by the clarity of our own example. So, again, the whole point of this prayer is to let it begin with me. That's one of the great slogans of the 12 traditions. And I change this step around and say, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, I try to practice these principles in all my affairs, and in doing so, carry this message to others. So, who can we forgive this week? Where can we see gratitude where we were seeing irritation, lack of peace of mind? Where can you keep this prayer with you this week so that you can put it to good use? I brought some plastic sleeves along if anybody wants to slide it in there so that you can't spill your coffee on it and not read it anymore. Those are available to you. John, could you lead us in a prayer?
Thank you. Susan, I think the same Wallace, same nuclear physicist. So talking to how Rosencrantz says we all have leaky margins. We are not these bodies that you think we are. We're much broader and much more immense. We have leaky margins. So the forgiveness I do today changes the world. It truly does. Thank you, Susan. Awesome. So let's go to prayer. Take a minute now. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this awesome, beautiful day. Thank you for the relationships in my life. Thank you for the friendships. Thank you for the difficulties in my life. Thank you for the difficulties in my relationships and friendships, that I can learn these immense lessons that I came here to learn. May I always be able to look upon my brother as myself. May I always be able to look upon my upset with my brother as an opportunity for my own happiness, my own peace of mind, my own mastery of my mind, my opportunity to de-trigger myself, to remove the buttons that take me out of control and set me scrambling and upset. May I become even wiser and more attuned consciously, moment by moment, to my ability to master those buttons by instantaneously forgiving everyone, immediately. Even if it takes me a half hour of reading this prayer, to see myself in my brother, to see my brother as myself. And so I'm grateful, and I ask for your help, Divine Spirit. I ask for your help today and all week long to do this, because I want to be happy, I want to be joyous, and I want to be free always. Take a deep breath with me and know that I intend to be happy, I intend to be joyful, I intend to be free always. That is my divine inheritance, and I'm so blessed. So be it, and so it is. Amen.